Let's begin by looking at the invisible scripts that are quietly, relentlessly running your life. How much of your daily behavior is actually a conscious, authentic choice, and how much of it is just a highly rehearsed performance? How often do you stay completely silent in a meeting when you want to scream in frustration simply because people expect you to be the calm one? How often do you take on another massive project, sacrificing your weekend and completely exhausting yourself because you were told early on that you are the reliable one, the one who never drops the ball? How often do you hide your struggles, mask your exhaustion, and bury your failures, terrified of being exposed because somewhere along the way you were labeled the perfect one? We think we grow up and become independent adults. We think we graduate, climb the corporate ladder, and build our own authentic leadership styles from scratch. We mistake our conditioning for our character. But if we look closely, if we dare to look beneath the polished veneer of our professional lives, many of us are still just acting out the roles we were assigned when we were children. This is the prison of the assigned identity. It is the deep, subconscious belief that if we drop the label others gave us, we will lose their love, their respect, their validation, and ultimately our place in the tribe. We are so terrified of abandonment that we willingly trade our freedom for their approval. Stay with me until the end of this episode. We are going to look at the deep psychology of the false self, dive into existential philosophy to understand why playing a role is a profound betrayal of your own humanity, and I will share a very painful, deeply personal story about the suffocating, silent weight of being labeled the perfect son. Welcome to the H2H experiment. I'm João and I am your host. If you have been searching for a leadership podcast that dares to look behind the corporate mask and ask the dangerous question, you have found your home. This is not your standard self-improvement podcast filled with surface-level life hacks. Today, we are doing deep psychological and philosophical surgery. We are going to deconstruct the labels that have been holding you hostage, explore the crippling existential cost of performing your identity, and learn how to finally courageously take off the mask. To understand why we feel so perpetually exhausted as leaders, why we can sleep for 8 hours and still wake up tired, we have to travel back to the very beginning. We have to look at how human identity is formed in the crucible of childhood. The renowned psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott introduced a groundbreaking concept, the division between the true self and the false self. When we are infants and young children, our primary overriding biological drive is to secure attachment. We are completely dependent. We need love, safety, and approval from our caregivers to survive physically and emotionally. Very early on, society, our schools, and our families begin to assign us labels. These labels are rarely about who we actually are. They are almost always about what makes the adults around us feel comfortable and secure. If your family environment was chaotic, you might have learned to be the peacemaker to de-escalate the tension. If your parents valued intellect above all else, you became the smart one. If they were overwhelmed, you became the fixer or the independent one who never needed help. You quickly subconsciously learn a dangerous formula. When you act within the narrow, rigid boundaries of this label, you get rewarded, you get praised, you get love. But when you step outside of it, when the peacemaker finally gets angry and sets a boundary, or when the smart one brings home a failing grade, or when the strong one cries, the environment becomes tense. The warmth disappears. The love is temporarily withdrawn or conditional. So to survive, your psyche pulls off a brilliant but tragic defense mechanism. You build a false self. The great analytical psychologist Carl Jung called this the persona. derived from the Latin word for the theatrical masks worn by actors. You construct a personality entirely designed to fulfill the expectations of your assigned label. You learn your lines, you hit your marks, you become a highly skilled actor in a play you didn't even write. But here is the ultimate tragedy of the false self. It protects you when you are young and vulnerable, but it traps you when you are an adult. You carry this childhood survival mechanism straight into the boardroom, into your emails, and into your one-to-ones. You spend your entire adult life paying exorbitant rent on an identity that isn't even yours in the first place. To truly grasp the gravity of the psychological trap, we must turn to existential philosophy. We must look at what it means to be truly free. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre introduced a concept called mauvaise foi, forgive my French, which translates to bad faith. To explain it, Sartre famously described a waiter in a Parisian cafe. He noted that this waiter moves a little too rigidly, like a mechanism. He balances his tray with a little too much theatrical flair, and he speaks with a little too much exaggerated robotic deference to the customers. Sartre observed that the man is not actually being a human being. He is playing the role of a waiter. He has reduced his entire complex, messy, free human existence into the narrow, predefined label of his job description. This is bad faith. It is the act of lying to yourself. It is pretending that you are an object, a label, a role, a fixed and unchangeable entity, rather than a free human subject capable of infinite choice and evolution. Think about how often we do this in leadership. We put on our CEO voice or our manager persona. We act how we think a leader should act rather than how a human being would act. When you allow a label like the fixer or the perfect one to dictate your actions, you are living in pure bad faith. You are actively denying your own existential freedom. You tell yourself, I have to take on this extra work because this is who I am. I am the reliable one. But Sartre would look at you and say, nope, you do not have to. You are choosing to do this because you are terrified of the anxiety that comes with being truly free. Freedom means you are responsible for defining yourself, and that is terrifying. It is much easier to just follow the script. Philosophically, when you accept a label, you are taking on a massive emotional debt, and the interest rate on that debt is your own soul. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard captured this perfectly when he said, the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. We do not lose ourselves in a sudden dramatic explosion. We lose ourselves slowly, day by day, email by email, compromise by compromise, by agreeing to play the character the world told us we were supposed to be. Now, let's bring this out of the realm of philosophy and into the realm of your business. Imagine what happens when a leader who is still living in bad faith, wearing their childhood label like a suit of armor, walks into organization and starts managing people. If you're listening to this with the ears of a human resource professional looking for a human resource podcast, you see the devastating fallout of this dynamic every single day. We talk a lot about burnout in the corporate world, but we misdiagnose it. Burnout is rarely about working too many hours or answering too many emails. Burnout is the profound existential friction of having to constantly pretend to be someone else. It is the soul's exhaustion from holding up the mask. When a leader operates from a false self, they cannot see others authentically. They inevitably project labels onto their team. They don't see dynamic, evolving human beings. They see static caricatures meant to play supporting roles in their own psychological drama. Think about what happens when a leader labels an employee the rock star. Suddenly, that employee is trapped on a pedestal. They are terrified to ever show weakness, ask for a mental health break, or admit they don't know the answer to a complex problem. The rock star will hide their mistakes until those mistakes become organizational catastrophes, simply because they cannot afford to lose the label. Or think about the reverse. When a leader labels someone the underperformer through the well-documented psychological phenomenon known as the Pygmalion effect, the leader changes their behavior toward that person. They give them less eye contact, less constructive feedback, and less grace. The employee begins to internalize the label. They feel the leader's lack of belief, and they subconsciously lower their own performance to match the leader's negative expectation. The label becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We box people in. We reduce the vastness and the messy brilliance of human potential to a single reductive word on a quarterly performance review. A culture built on rigid labels is a culture entirely devoid of true psychological safety. Because safety is not just about being able to speak up. Safety is the freedom to change, to contradict yourself, to evolve, and to be profoundly human. You cannot be human if you are forced to be a label. All right, now I would like to pause here, step out of the theory, and share something that I have struggled with for almost my entire life. I would like to share this with you. It is the very reason I am so passionate about this topic, and it is the shadow I have spent years trying to integrate, and I'm still working on that. Growing up, I was given a very specific, very heavy label. I was labeled the perfect son. From the outside, it sounds like a massive compliment, doesn't it? It sounds like a badge of honor, a marker of success that any child would want. But from the inside, from behind my own eyes, it was a maximum security prison. Because I was the perfect son, the unspoken, terrifying rule of my existence was that I was absolutely not allowed to fail. I was not allowed to be messy, to be rebellious, to be angry, or to make choices that disappointed the people around me. My entire sense of self-worth, my entire mechanism for receiving love and validation became exclusively tethered to maintaining this flawless, pristine image. I carried this label straight into adulthood and straight into my leadership career. I became a leader who was secretly, constantly terrified of making a mistake. I over-prepared for everything to an obsessive degree. I was leading not from a place of bold vision, but from a place of deep, hidden, chronic fear and anxiety. I was highly successful on paper. The world looked at me and applauded, but inside I was suffocating. I realized that my ambition wasn't actually my own. My drive wasn't fueled by passion. It was just the relentless, exhausting engine required to keep the perfect label intact. I was living in pure Sartrean bad faith. I was the waiter in the cafe, just playing my role. The turning point came during a moment of profound burnout, when I realized that being perfect meant I was entirely disconnected from myself. I didn't even know what I actually wanted anymore. I didn't know what I enjoyed. Because every single decision I made, from the clothes I wore to the strategies I pitched, was filtered through the lens of what is the right thing to do to maintain that image. I had to learn a terrifying age-to-age truth, perhaps the hardest lesson of my life. To find yourself, you have to be willing to disappoint the people who fell in love with your mask. I had to intentionally let the label of perfect die, and it was painful. I had to let people see me fail. I had to let them see me struggle. I had to kill the image so that the flawed, real, authentic João could finally take his first breath. Shedding a label is not a simple intellectual or mental exercise. It is a profound act of grief, and it is an act of philosophical rebellion. When you finally decide to stop being the fixer, the peacemaker, or the perfect one, people will be upset. The system will absolutely push back. Your family, your boss, and your team might say, you've changed. You aren't being yourself. You're being difficult. But they're wrong. You are finally becoming yourself. You have just stopped abandoning yourself to keep them comfortable. In psychology, this is known as the change back phenomenon. When one person in a system changes their dance steps, everyone else in the system steps on each other's toes. And they will try to guilt you back into your old routine so they don't have to change theirs. True leadership requires the courage to be unlabelable. It requires you to radically embrace your own complexity and contradictions. You are allowed to be incredibly strong and decisive on Monday and deeply vulnerable and unsure on Tuesday. You are allowed to be brilliant in one strategic meeting and completely lost in the next one. You do not owe the world a consistent two-dimensional caricature. You owe yourself the truth of your own multifaceted humanity. All right, now let's move to the H2H experiment of the week. This time, I want you to conduct a psychological and philosophical audit of the invisible scripts running your life. It is time to look at the tags you're wearing. The name of this experiment is the label burn. Step 1. Take a physical, really a piece of paper, and write down the labels you were given growing up and the labels you currently carry in your organization and in your life. The reliable one, the difficult one, the savior, the hero, the quiet one, the workhorse, the perfect one. Step 2. Take a look at that list. Pick the one label that feels the heaviest, the one that dictates your behavior the most, the one that makes you feel exhausted just looking at it. Then I would ask you to ask yourself two brutal, honest questions. 1. What is the payoff? What approval, praise, or illusion of safety do I get by wearing this label? Whose love am I trying to secure by acting this way? Second question. What is the existential cost? What part of my true self, my freedom, and my joy am I sacrificing to keep this label alive? What resentment is building up inside of me because of it? And then you move to step 3. Your mission here is to intentionally act out of character in a small, safe way. If you are the strong one, look at a trusted colleague in the eye and tell them you are genuinely overwhelmed and need help. If you are the perfect one, openly share a mistake you made in a meeting without immediately defending or justifying it. Break the contract. Observe the guilt that rises up and let it pass. Trust me, you will feel bad when you do it. Just hold on. Prove to your nervous system that the world does not end when you drop the mask. Okay, now let's wrap up this episode. The labels others give us are just their desperate subconscious attempt to make us predictable and safe. But human beings were not meant to be predictable. We were meant to be alive. We were meant to be wild, contradictory, and continuously evolving. Leadership is not about living up to the neat, tidy expectations of the crowd. It is about having the profound courage to step out of the box they built for you and creating an environment where your team feels safe to do exactly the same. You know, there is a reason why this show, the H2H Experiment podcast, is growing so much among the top leadership podcasts for leaders who want depth. It's because we are not afraid of the messy philosophical truth of what it means to be human at work. If this episode helped you see your own invisible straitjacket, I want to invite you to continue your journey of deep personal growth podcast exploration. You can follow our latest reflections, deep dives, and ongoing discussions on LinkedIn and Substack. You can explore more of our H2H experiments and tools and frameworks in our website, the h2hexperiment.com, or you can join the community, the ECXO platform, where we explore the world of customer experience and employee experience. And for the full comprehensive roadmap on transforming your business, your leadership by dropping the mask, check out the HX Revolution book series available right now on Amazon. They're here right behind me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking off the name tag. And thank you for having the courage to finally disappoint the audience so you can meet yourself. Because a label is just a cage with an open door. Walk out. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.